When a modern public relations crisis hits, I mean, there is a very specific, highly calculated playbook, right?
Oh, absolutely. It is a machine.
Yeah, somebody starts spreading malicious lies about you, or maybe they launch this coordinated political smear campaign. And what do? You immediately call the lawyers.
Right. You draft up a very sterile press release.
Yeah, you hire a crisis management firm to go on the offensive with, like, cold precision. You fight destructive words with better, more strategic words.
And all while trying to project absolute stability to the public,
Yeah.
Controlling the narrative is the entire game.
Right. You want to look like the calmest, most unbothered person in the room.
Because any display of raw emotion is viewed as a liability. It is a crack in the armor that your opponents can just exploit.
Well, welcome to Reform Thinking. You, our listener, are the crucial third person in this room with us today. And you brought a piece of source material to the table that, frankly, throws that modern PR playbook completely out the window.
It really does. Flips it on its head.
Yeah. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a specific commentary by the 19th century German scholar Carl Friedrich Keil. This is from the classic Keil and Delitzsch series, specifically on Psalm 7.
Right, and we are going to break down how a person facing an ancient political smear campaign processes severe slander.
Yeah, how they appeal to divine justice and how they understand the self-destructive mechanics of evil itself.
Because this text bridges the gap between a frantic historical crisis and massive theological insight. We are looking at the internal mechanics of a mind under siege.
And how that intense psychological pressure forces a radical reorientation toward justice. But to understand the massive theological claims made later in this commentary, we really first need to establish the historical reality the author, David, was actually facing.
Yeah, he's not just dealing with a bad news cycle. He is actively being hunted by the military of his own nation.
Which is terrifying. And the commentary draws our attention immediately to the superscription of the psalm, right?
Right. These ancient musical tags give us the historical anchor for the text. It reads, Shigajon of David, which he sang to Jahve on account of the sayings of Cush a Benjamite.
Okay, let's pause there, because Cush is a figure who requires a bit of historical reconstruction. I mean, he does not have a massive biography in the historical books of Samuel.
No, not at all. If you flip through the historical records, Cush is essentially a phantom.
So how does Keil figure out who he is?
Well, Keil argues we can deduce his identity and his role based on his tribal affiliation and the context of King Saul's court. Keil points out that Cush was likely a servant and kinsman of King Saul.
And Saul was also a Benjamite.
Spot on. So this means we are looking at a royal court heavily influenced by tribal nepotism.
Ah, okay, so it is an insider's club.
Yeah, and Cush was functioning as a palebearer, essentially a political operative. Think of him in the same vein as Doeg the Edomite or the Ziphites.
Oh, right, the guys who actively whispered in King Saul's ear?
Right, fueling the king's existing paranoia. They fabricated stories, they framed David as a treasonous threat, and they turned the full weight of the state against an innocent man through calculated slander.
So David is dealing with an insider, someone who has the undivided attention of the most powerful man in the country, and this operative is just dripping poison into that ear every single day.
Every day.
Yeah.
And the psychological toll of knowing someone is destroying your character behind closed doors while you are sleeping in caves has to be staggering.
It boggles the mind, honestly. And David's response to this is captured in that word you mentioned earlier, right? Shigajon.
Yes, shigajon. The linguistic root of that word is fascinating.
Break it down for us.
So Keil traces shigajon to the Hebrew root shuga, which means to go astray, to wander, or to reel.
To reel, like staggering.
Yeah, and it is actually cognate with the Hebrew word for madness, shigajon. In language of ancient prosody, a shigajon denotes a reeling poem.
A reeling poem, I just love that description. It makes me think of an erratic, chaotic piece of music, almost like an ancient, panic-induced bohemian rhapsody.
That is a great way to picture it.
Because you have these massive, irregular strophes, rapid emotional shifts, jarring tempo changes. I mean, 1 second he is whispering in absolute terror, the next he is screaming for cosmic justice.
Right, it mirrors the physical sensation of vertigo. It is the sound of a person trying to keep their grip on reality while their world spins completely out of control.
And that musical analogy fits the technical structure Keil describes, doesn't it?
It does. Keil notes that earlier Latin expositors translated as cantio erratica, a wandering song.
A wandering song, yeah.
It wandered through the most diverse rhythms, as if in a state of severe intoxication or shock. You have painful unrest, defiant self-confidence, triumphant ecstasy, calm trust, prophetic certainty.
Wow, all of that in one text.
Yeah, all these distinct psychological states are violently mixed together in this single dithyramb.
And you see that violent mixture immediately in the opening verses. I mean, David starts with what the commentary calls a captatio benevolentiae, right?
Right, a holy appeal for goodwill.
Yeah, he says he is taking refuge, hiding himself in God. But look at the imagery he uses to describe the threat of Cush and Saul's men. He asks to be saved, lest the enemy tear my soul like a lion, rending it in pieces while there is none to deliver.
Yeah, he is not talking about a polite courtroom battle.
Yes.
The language there is incredibly visceral.
It is terrifying.
It draws on the pastoral realities of ancient Judea, where lion attacks on flocks were a genuine everyday threat. Keil highlights two specific Hebrew verbs used here, teraf and parak.
Okay, what do those mean?
Well, teraf means to tear off or tear in pieces, specifically evoking the image of a wild animal crunching the bones of its prey.
Crunching the bones, that is graphic.
It is. And parak means to break loose or violently crush into small pieces. David envisions his political persecutors not as human adversaries, but as bloodthirsty predators acting on pure malice.
Okay, so when a human being is hunted by a predator, whether it is a literal lion or a militarized smear campaign, the first instinct is pure, unadulterated survival.
Sure, you run.
You run, you hide, you fight back with whatever weapon you can find. Yet David's first defense, and here's where the text subverts all of our expectations, is an audit of his own morality.
Yes.
Instead of launching a counterattack against Cush, he turns the spotlight completely inward.
This is a massive pivot in the text.
Yeah.
Moving from the external threat of Cush's slander and that visceral fear of the lion, the discussion turns inward to David's personal defense mechanism.
Right.
He initiates a startlingly severe conditional curse upon his own life.
And I have to challenge the logic of verses 4 through 6 here, because honestly, it sounds like suicidal arrogance.
How so?
Well, David says, if I have done this, if there is iniquity in my hands, if I have rewarded evil to him that was at peace with me, let the enemy persecute my soul and take it. Let him tread my life down to the earth.
Yeah, it is heavy.
Would any rational person invite total violent destruction upon themselves if they had even a single moral failing in a complex political dispute? I mean, it feels like utter madness to hand your enemies a blank check to destroy you if you are anything less than sinless.
It definitely sounds like madness until we ground this curse in the specific historical reality Keil points to.
Okay, what is the anchor here?
The phrase, if I have rewarded evil to him that was at peace with me, is not a general claim of lifelong sinlessness.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better.
Right, it connects directly to a specific empirical event recorded in 1 Samuel chapters 24 and 26. This is the famous cave incident at Engedi.
Oh, let's set that scene because it is the ultimate high-stakes encounter.
For sure.
David is hiding in the pitch black of a cave with his loyal men. King Saul, the man who has mobilized the army to hunt David, down wanders into that exact cave to relieve himself, completely unaware that he just walked into the lion's den.
Saul's entirely vulnerable.
Yes, and David's men are whispering to him, urging him to strike. They believe God has delivered the enemy into his hands. I mean, one strike, and the smear campaign ends. One strike, and David takes the throne.
But David refuses to strike. He chooses only to cut the hem of Saul's garment in the dark, just to prove he had the opportunity, but he absolutely refuses to harm the king.
Right.
And Keil provides a brilliant linguistic analysis of this specific moment to show how it is embedded in the poetry of Song 7. He draws our attention to two verbs, gamal and halatz.
Break those down for us. Let's look at gamal first.
The Hebrew verb gamal means to finish, complete, or requite. In this context, David is saying he did not requite evil. He did not retaliate against Saul when the opportunity presented itself.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. What about the other one?
Well, the real revelation comes with the verb halatz. In many standard English translations, you will see this rendered as rescued, meaning, I rescued him that without cause is mine enemy.
Yeah, but translating it as rescued never really made sense to me in the context of an ambush. I mean, you don't rescue the guy who was trying to kill you while he is taking a bathroom break in your cave.
No, you don't.
You just choose not to assassinate him. That isn't a rescue.
And that tension is exactly why Keil's analysis is so valuable here. He argues the standard translation misses the mark.
Interesting. So what is his alternative?
He suggests a different, far more specific reading based on the Aramaic root exuere or spoliare, which means to strip, plunder, or despoil.
Oh, wow. So David is not saying, I rescued Saul. He is saying, I did not strip him.
That is the mechanism Keil identifies. In ancient warfare, Stripping a fallen enemy of their armor, their exuve, was not just about stealing expensive metal.
Right, it was symbolic.
It was the ultimate desecration of a rival's identity, power, and dignity. So David is asserting he did not strip Saul of his armor or his royal dignity when he had the perfect opportunity in the cave.
He just took the hem.
Right, he took the hem of the garment, but he displayed absolute restraint regarding the armor and the life of the Lord's anointed. He proved his innocence through a tangible physical action. He did not act like a predator, unlike the men hunting him.
So this conditional curse, let the enemy tread down my life, is not reckless hyperbole or arrogance.
Not at all.
It is David saying, look at the empirical evidence, look at the cave. If I were the treasonous usurper Cush claims I am, Saul would be dead in the dirt and I would be wearing his armor.
Spot on. And Keil shows how this total moral audit is reflected even in the grammar of the text.
Oh, I love the grammar notes. Lay it on me.
He points out a highly unusual feature in verse 6 that changes the entire cadence of the poem. The verb for persecute, when David says, let the enemy persecute my soul, is written in a unique three-syllable dactylic jussive form.
Okay, a three-syllable dactylic jussive. For you, the listener, who maybe does not have a degree in ancient Hebrew syntax, how does that actually sound and why does the grammar matter?
Think about how grammar affects emotional weight. A standard command in Hebrew might be short, sharp, and fast. But here, the poet stretches the word out.
Okay.
And instead of the tight yerdov, it becomes the elongated yeridov. By adding a specific vowel sound and an emphatic hardening of the consonant, the rhythm of the language shifts into a heavy, deliberate beat.
So instead of a quick, sharp word, the grammar stretches it into a slow, marching beat, like da-da-da, da-da-da-dum.
Yes, precisely.
You can literally hear the heavy footsteps of the executioner approaching.
The sound of the words matches the terrifying gravity of the curse. He is matching the rhythm as a death sentence. And this ties into a fascinating aspect of biblical psychology that Keil highlights.
Which is?
David talks about his soul, his life, and his dignity or glory being laid in the dust. The commentary notes that the soul is referred to here as the doxa, a copy of divine glory.
A copy of divine glory. What does that mean in the ancient Hebrew mind?
According to this ancient framework, the soul is not a detached immortal ghost that merely occupies a physical shell. The soul binds spirit and body together into a unified person. And crucially, it is mortal in the sense that it is capable of being killed, of being violently separated and laid in the dust of death.
Wow, so he is putting everything on the line.
Absolutely. David is willing to submit this divine copy, his very existence, to absolute destruction if he has acted dishonorably in the cave.
So he proves his innocence on a local, personal level. He points to the cave, he points to the hem, he lays his life on the line and says, audit my actions.
Yeah.
But once that personal audit is complete, the scope of the text dramatically widens, doesn't it? We go from a dark, claustrophobic cave in the Middle East to a massive cosmic stage. A local dispute between a king and a shepherd becomes a universal courtroom scene.
And David's clean conscience is the legal standing that allows him to demand that hearing. He is not asking for a local magistrate to clear his name or for a counter-PR campaign to sway public opinion.
Right.
He is escalating this dispute directly to the judge of the entire earth.
It is like taking a petty small claims court dispute about a scratched bumper and immediately escalating it to the Supreme Court of the universe and demanding that all the nations of the world act as your jury. It is incredibly bold.
It is a breathtaking escalation.
Verses 7 through 9 feel like a cinematic set piece. Arise, Yahweh, in thine anger. Let the host of the nations stand round about thee.
Keil explains that biblical prophets frequently combine specific local judgments with the final global judgment. They paint them on the exact same canvas.
Is there a term for that?
Yes, this is known as prophetic foreshortening. The truth of this combination lies in the theological belief that the final cosmic judgment is just the grand finale of the justice that God is constantly executing in the world every single day.
So the micro points to the macro.
For sure. The local conflict with Cush and Saul is treated as a microcosm of the whole world's hostility towards God's anointed.
But if David is escalating this to a cosmic Supreme Court, the judge in that court cannot be a passive observer. What is the actual emotional state of a judge looking at this level of calculated injustice? Because David calls for God to arise in anger, and Keil's linguistic analysis of the word for anger here is vivid.
It is very vivid. Keil focuses on the Hebrew word ibroth. He notes it is a shorter construct form that describes wrath not as a static emotion, but as something running over,
Like boiling.
more like a flood. He connects it to an Arabic root used to describe water overflowing and violently bursting a dam. It is an anger that breaks forth from within and passes over into decisive words and deeds.
So we are not talking about a simmering passive-aggressive resentment. It is a dam bursting under unbearable pressure. It is an unstoppable force of nature washing away the lies of the smear campaign.
Absolutely.
And then the text gives us this incredible special arrangement of the courtroom scene.
Yeah.
How does Keil visualize the geometry of this judgment?
The psalmist arranges this cosmic judgment scene with geometric precision. First, God is called to awake and gird himself.
Which is a physical metaphor for preparing for action.
Right. Then the assembly of nations is called to form a massive circle around him. God sits in the center of this jury, assuming the posture of a monarch executing judgment.
Sitting down to judge.
And finally, after the judgment is rendered and the truth is established, the text says he returns on high. He soars aloft over the assembly like a victorious general returning to the heights after a definitive battle.
It is an awe-inspiring image, but I want you, the listener, to pause and consider the terrifying reality of actually standing in that cosmic circle.
It would be overwhelming.
The dam has burst, the Supreme Court is in session, the judge is seated in the center. How does the judge actually evaluate the people standing before him? What is the standard of evidence when the PR spins and the press releases are stripped away?
Well, because the judge is seated in the center of all nations, the text must establish his criteria for judgment. And it is not based on hearsay or political spin or the slanderous whispers of someone like Cush.
Right.
It is based on his ability to see into the literal biology of human motives.
Okay, but I have to raise attention here, though. We are looking at a text where David is pleading for the wrath of God to crush his enemies. How do we reconcile this ancient demand for a bursting dam of wrath with the broader biblical ethic of loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you?
This is a vital question, and Keil addresses it directly by looking at the grammar of the Hebrew verbs. It comes down to judging the sin versus judging the sinner.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Let's look closely at verse 9. The text says, "Oh, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end." Keil points out that the verb here, gomer, is intransitive.
Meaning it does not have a direct object taking action in a violent physical way.
Correct. The prayer is directed against the wickedness that is inside the person, not the individual as such. David is praying for the cessation of the evil itself.
I see.
This psalm acts as a hermeneutical key to understanding other similar imprecatory texts. The primary desire is for the malice to be neutralized and for the righteous to be established.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. It is a surgical strike on the malice, not a blanket desire for human destruction. But performing that kind of moral surgery requires a judge who can see the difference between the person and the poison infecting them, right?
Absolutely.
Which leads us to the phrase, trieth the hearts and reins.
The linguistic and cultural analysis here reveals how ancient people understood psychology. In ancient Hebrew thought, the anatomy of the physical body was tied directly to the anatomy of the soul.
So they didn't just separate mind and body.
No, they did not locate human consciousness solely in the brain. The reins, which are the kidneys, were considered the seat of human emotions, the deepest, most hidden feelings and impulses. The heart was considered the seat of thoughts, logic, and intellect.
So when the text says God tries the hearts and reins, it means he is auditing both your logic and your deepest, unfiltered emotions, your calculative thoughts and your raw passions.
Keil uses a Greek term to describe God's posture here, kardiagnostis, the knower of hearts. God sees humanity entirely naked.
Wow.
The reins in the heart lie completely exposed before him. He knows the exact ambition driving Cush to lie. He knows the paranoia consuming Saul, and he knows the terror driving David to seek refuge.
There is nowhere to hide the PR spin. You cannot hire a crisis manager to fix your kidneys in this scenario. Your deepest motives are laid bare.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And Keil points out a really brilliant structural gem right around this part of the text, an ancient literary device that reinforces this idea of perfect justice.
Yeah, in verses 10 and 11, Keil identifies a favorite poetic device called a palindrome.
A palindrome in English is a word or phrase that reads the same forwards and backwards, like race car. But how does that work in ancient Hebrew poetry?
It is applied to the structure of the lines rather than a single word. It is a form of chiasmus. The text repeats the word righteous at the end of the first two lines of this section.
Okay, so it mirrors itself.
Right, it creates a structural symmetry, a mirroring effect. The righteous God carries the shield of the upright in heart. This palindrome is a device often seen in the book of Isaiah, and it reinforces the idea of perfect balance. The structure of the poem itself reflects the balanced scales of the judge.
Okay, so we have established that God is the cardiognostes. He can read the kidneys and the heart perfectly. The dam of anger is ready to burst, and the scales are perfectly balanced. But what happens when he looks into those reins and sees a heart that absolutely refuses to change?
That is where it gets intense.
A person who doubles down on the smear campaign despite the warnings. The text suddenly shifts from the courtroom to the armory.
Having established God's perfect knowledge of human motives, Keil moves to the terrifying reality of what happens when a person remains unrepentant. We get a vivid tour of the arsenal of divine justice.
And when I read verses 12 through 14, the imagery gave me genuine anxiety. We aren't talking about abstract consequences anymore.
No, it is very literal imagery.
The text describes a sword being sharpened and a bow being bent. I like to think of it in terms of potential energy in physics.
How so?
Well, it is like a tightly coiled spring or a bowstring pulled back to the anchor point, trembling with tension. The only thing keeping it from snapping forward and causing devastation is a temporary, deliberate friction. It represents this suspended state of impending consequence.
That suspended tension of potential energy is a perfect way to grasp the Hebrew verbs used here. Keil focuses on the conditional clause that starts this section.
Right.
If a man will not repent.
Right.
This reveals something vital about the nature of this judgment. It is not arbitrary, and it is not impulsive. God issues daily warnings.
Yeah, the text mentions God is a God who threatens day by day.
The Hebrew word for these daily threatenings is zam. Keil explains that God makes the ungodly feel his zam beforehand in order to strike a wholesome terror into them. Yes. Warning shots across the bow. They are designed to wake the person up, to shatter their delusions, and to give them a chance to turn back before the potential energy of the weapons is released into kinetic energy.
A wholesome terror. I find that phrase so compelling. It is a fear designed to save your life. It is the fear of touching a hot stove.
That is a great analogy.
But if that wholesome terror is ignored, if the person refuses to drop the smear campaign, the potential energy reaches its limit. Keil details these specific, vivid embodiments of divine anger. We have the whetted sword actively being sharpened. We have the bent bow, strung and ready.
The alternating verbs Keil points out are key to the pacing here. The verb for making the bow ready and the verb for aiming it show that the judgment is being gradually prepared, but it is also, simultaneously, a string pulled, taut.
Ready to snap.
It can be executed at any millisecond. God's forbearance is the only friction holding the string back.
And the arrows loaded into this bow are not just standard munitions, are they?
No. Keil breaks down the phrase burning arrows. He uses the Latin term maliciously, referring to ancient fire arrows used in sieges. But in this poetic context, these symbolize lightnings.
So God's arrows are literal thunderbolts of wrath.
Yes. And Keil's linguistic analysis of the future tense verb used here, yifel, denotes the simultaneous aiming and charging of these arrows with the fire of his wrath.
He is drawing the string and lighting the fuse at the exact same moment. The specific case of Cush the Benjamite has been generalized into a symbol of manifold divine energy.
Keil is careful to note that this conception is not coarsely material. God does not literally possess a physical wooden bow and flaming arrows.
Of course not.
But the vividness of the idea of absolute, unavoidable justice naturally suggests the form of its embodiment. It gives the human mind a physical framework to understand a metaphysical reality.
It gives us the image of the tightly coiled spring. But here is the massive irony of this entire text. We just spent all this time walking through this terrifying armory, looking at the lightning arrows and the sharpened swords. Yet the climax of the psalm reveals that God often does not even need to loose the arrow.
Right.
The sinner ends up destroying themselves.
This brings us to the final section of Keil's commentary. The climax of the text reveals the internal mechanics of evil. Evil is not just punished from the outside by a divine archer, it is inherently self-destructive from the inside.
When I was studying this section, I noticed a biological sequence issue in the text that confused me. Verse 15 talks about the self-sabotage of sin, but it says, "Behold, he travaileth with evil, he conceiveth trouble, and bringeth forth falsehood."
Right. The order seems off.
Why does it mention travail, which means labor pains, before mentioning conceiving? Is that not backwards biology? You conceive, and then months later you travail.
It looked backwards in English for sure, but Keil resolves this brilliantly using comparative Semitic linguistics. He points to an Arabic cognate word, habila.
Wait, why is a German scholar looking at Arabic to understand a Hebrew psalm?
Because Hebrew and Arabic are part of the same language family, and sometimes an Arabic root preserves a broader shade of meaning that helps clarify a difficult Hebrew idiom.
Oh, that makes sense.
So habila means both to be pregnant and to become pregnant. It covers the entire state of gestation. So Keil suggests that the text is not giving a strict chronological sequence in the first half of the verse.
Okay, so how should we read it?
Rather, it gives a general statement first. Behold, he travails with evil. This means he is writhing in the heavy, burdensome pains of producing wickedness. Then the verse breaks that general statement down into its two conceptual factors, conceiving Amal and bearing Shaker.
Okay, let's look at those two factors, conceiving Amal and bearing Shaker.
Amal signifies trouble or molestation. It is that which causes pain or harm to others. Shaker signifies falsehood, specifically self-deception, delusion, or vanity.
Okay, so let me get this straight.
Go ahead.
The sinner conceives this painful trouble aimed at someone else, but what is actually born from that gestation is a delusion that traps the sinner.
Spot on.
Think about the last time you saw someone caught in a massive lie. The sheer amount of physical and mental energy they have to spend maintaining that lie, keeping their story straight, worrying about who knows what, that is exactly the labor pain this text is talking about.
It is exhausting just thinking about it.
It is the boomerang effect.
Yeah.
Keil explains the psychological insight perfectly. Sin is self-deception. The burden a person prepares for others, the trap they set to ruin someone's reputation, becomes their own heavy, oppressive burden.
Right.
They think they are destroying David, but they are actually crushing themselves under the weight of their own sheker.
And the visual imagery shifts to support this mechanical collapse. The text talks about digging a pit. Keil says, he hath digged a pit and hollowed it out, and falleth into the hollow that he is making.
Digging their own grave, essentially.
The Hebrew syntax indicates that in the very midst of the execution of the work of destruction, it becomes his own destruction.
So, while he is holding the shovel, sweating, and digging the trap for someone else, the ground beneath his own feet gives way.
The trouble returns upon his own head. The violent dealing he planned comes down upon his own pate. The Hebrew word used for peti is kodkod, which means the crown of the head.
The crown of the head.
It is a very specific, physical description of the violence returning precisely to the source.
So the smear campaign against David, all the whispers of Cush, the lies told to Saul in the royal court, they do not just fail, they structurally collapse on the people who built them. The architecture of evil is inherently unstable. It cannot hold its own weight.
And this leads to the conclusion of the text. David wraps up his analysis with verse 18. He gives thanks to Jah the Most High. The Hebrew term is Elyon. Keil notes that Elyon is an appended name of God used without the article, implying absolute, unmatched supremacy.
The highest, the sovereign over all structural realities.
Yes. David notes that God has revealed his character by allowing justice to naturally execute itself upon the wicked. The judge ruling over everything does not always need to strike with lightning. He simply allows the hollowed-out pit to swallow the digger. It is a perfectly balanced universe where malice consumes itself.
We have covered massive ground today. Let's summarize the progression we took through this text.
Good idea.
We started with a localized, panic-stricken smear campaign under King Saul, orchestrated by Cush the Benjamite. We watched David respond not with counter-slander or a PR firm, but by auditing his own conscience, pointing to the physical proof of his restraint in the cave at En-Gedi.
Right. From there, the clean conscience allowed David to escalate the conflict to a cosmic courtroom, bringing the dispute before the judge of the whole earth who reads the reins and hearts, auditing both the logic and the deepest emotions.
We viewed the terrifying armory, the daily warnings of wholesome terror, and the potential energy of the drawn bow. And finally, we arrived at the realization that evil digs its own grave. The trouble returns to the crown of the head of the person who conceived it. It is a stunning progression from historical panic to theological certainty.
The text provides a comprehensive framework for processing injustice.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on this commentary but challenges our modern assumptions. We talked earlier about biblical psychology, specifically the concept of the soul as a doxa, a copy of divine glory.
Right.
Keil suggested that in this ancient Hebrew framework, the soul is not some immortal, detached ghost that just floats away when you die while the body rots. It is something mortal that binds spirit and body together into a unified whole, capable of being laid in the dust.
It is a holistic view of the human person, directly contrasting with later Greek philosophy that split the person into a good spirit trapped in a bad physical body.
So here's the question for you. How does that ancient Hebrew view of a unified, mortal soul challenge our modern, heavily Greek-influenced assumptions about what happens to us?
It is a big question.
If we are a single, integrated creation whose very essence can be laid in the dust, how does that change the way we value our physical actions in the present moment? It means every physical action matters. The things we do with our hands, the words we speak with our mouths, the restraint we show in the dark.
Absolutely.
Which brings us right back to where we started. When the crisis hits, when the smear campaign begins and the PR nightmare is tearing your reality apart, your defense cannot just be better spin. It has to be the integrity of your whole self, down to the hem of the garment you chose not to take. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening.